Falls, and here we are. A little joke just before we start. Seems to be a good way of going with this thing. So it's February 7th, 2018. We're waiting for the big storm to come in.
Stormageddon coming in.
Snowmageddon.
I didn't dare go to the grocery store last night for fear of getting mauled by everyone.
Today,
everyone getting their
today.
bread and milk.
We had our Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day.
So we have 6 more weeks of winter.
I think that was probably the case no matter what.
It is, but it's good to know.
So,
Marty, want to go ahead with some local events?
We got a couple local events coming up. The first local event that we want to remind everybody about is the annual Bells Falls Rotary Club Spaghetti Dinner. Have you guys ever been to the Spaghetti Dinner?
No.
Oh, it is a happening time. Saturday, February 17th,
Are you going to be back?
5:30.
17th?
17th?
No, I'll still be out
I was
west.
going to say it's a classic. It's a classic local
At the Moose
dinner
Lodge.
at the Moose Lodge. It's Saturday the 17th from 5:30 to 7. Tickets are available at the door.
Tickets are available right here.
Tickets are available for any local Rotarian. We have tickets, and all of the money, all the proceeds from the spaghetti dinner go right back into the community. The Rotary uses it for service projects, their scholarships. So it's a great event. And then another Rotary event we have coming up, we actually spoke to you about a couple weeks ago, is Mike's project, The Importance of Hope, Steps to Help the Community Break the Cycle of Addiction. It's a community forum. It's at the Bells Falls Opera House on Thursday, February 22nd from 6 to 8. So that's coming right up.
Yeah, that's going to be good, too. There's going to be a lot of people, good speakers. There's going to be panels. There's going to be providers.
It's
really
a start.
It's
a start in the right direction.
Yes.
It's bringing the community together. And speaking of communities, we're going to talk about ancient communities, ancient roads that brought the communities together today.
Our guests today are Chris Bergman and Bob Haas, the most popular archaeologists in southern Vermont. They had the largest audience of followers, and that's pretty much it.
Well, I hear we are now breaking the Cincinnati market.
Yes, that's
We've
right.
broken into the Cincinnati
We were
market.
previously only Walpole, North Walpole, so now we're out there.
Yes,
Nationwide.
Nationwide.
Almost.
Awesome.
almost. Fantastic. But today we're going to talk about ancient roads, right?
Yes, Bob will kind of walk us through the Ancient Road Project.
How did you guys get started in ancient roads?
Well, I'll try to start from the beginning. About 10 years ago, somebody built a house, I believe it was up around Middlebury area, and they didn't realize it, but they built this house right on what they call an ancient road. Mm-hmm. And this was a road that hadn't been discontinued. But there was no evidence of a road. Sometimes you get on these old roads and there are stone walls on each side.
Yeah.
Other times one road that we have hiked, Chris and I, there'll be stone walls on each side, and then there'll be a stone wall on one side, and then there'll be no walls at all.
Uh-huh.
So person built a house on the road, and they didn't have the least idea that it was an old road. So
Wow.
that's what started, and then the state decreed that all these towns should survey all of these old roads and determine whether they wanted to keep them or not, and they set a certain date and for the town to decide. So that's what started it. And the town manager, Glenn Smith, at the time in Westminster, he knew that Randy Major and I were working on these old roads, and he decided that he approached me because he knew that we were working on these roads and cellar holes, and asked if I wanted to be on the committee. So they formed this committee. I kind of jumped on it because I figured roads are where houses were, and that's where cellar holes are now.
Right,
so
right.
It just made sense. So I got Randy Major on on the board with me, excuse me, and Ruth Grandy, and Ralph Lawrence and Toby Young got in on the end of it. And we would meet twice a week in the town hall and get these old, I have to step back, DiBernardo, the surveyor,
right.
Everybody knows Debo. And he was on the committee with us because he was very familiar with all the land records and everything to do with it. So what we would do, one of us would meet with him and read the surveys, the old road surveys out of the land records, read them to him, and then he would type the coordinates into his computer, and we would come out with a layout of a road, which, you know, it could be 25 or 30 different coordinates, and it could start at Peter Hall's barn. And if you had some idea of the old names, and maybe if you knew where Peter Hall's place was, you would have an idea where to start. Well, sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. So sometimes we would have to lay the old survey out on a map of the town and try to police this road where it was kind of like a puzzle.
Yeah.
But
So the roads are different now, like you go up Route 5.
Yeah.
Do you think Route 5 was always a road because of the way it's just an easy way, it's the terrain and everything, it's easy to go up there, or these ancient roads may have been for smaller groups of people?
well, Route 5 is, I think, pretty much where it was originally surveyed, but a lot of the old roads changed, and I think of one in the west part of town where it butts up against Athens, where that wasn't even on any of the old maps. It was given up before probably around 1840 or something
Really?
like that.
So
Wow.
do you think that which came first, the chicken or the egg? People just stopped using the roads because they found easier paths?
No,
Or
I think the people had moved on out.
moved
because,
out, and then so the roads, people moved away, the roads didn't get used. It
road
wasn't that
just-
they found
yeah,
easier
no need
paths.
to keep it open, so it was discontinued.
And I think Bob hits on a really good point here, you know, about the discontinuing use of a road. Just because a road is no longer active and perhaps, you know, the state is indicating, you know, that the road is no longer functional, that I believe the phrase you used was sort of do away with the road.
Well, they called it thrown up.
Thrown
Oh,
up
really?
the road. It doesn't mean that the roads are not historic resources, and so you know, one of the most moving things that ever occurred to me in my life, and it's sort of odd in a way because people don't necessarily think of this place in these terms, is that when I was in Greece, in Athens in particular, I went to visit the Acropolis, the high place with the Parthenon, and it wasn't so much the buildings at the top that were interesting to me. It was the road, the
Oh,
cobbled
really?
road leading to the top, because it made me think, who walked on these stones? You know, Socrates, Plato, who was actually traversing this way up to the Acropolis? And I think it's the same with these historic roads. They connect the historic landscape, as Bob's indicated, that you know, they are places that were absolutely necessary in terms of where folks settled, where
Right.
they undertook their activities. And I'd like to just read something really
Yeah, go
quick
ahead.
from
Go ahead.
this is Jesse Haas's book on Westminster, Vermont.
Wait a minute, Jesse Haas?
Jesse Haas is Bob's daughter.
That's my daughter.
I know, I was just bringing that out because I've been plugging the book a little bit.
Well, she does a very good job pulling together a lot of information about Township Number 1. So this is what she writes. There seems little reason today for some of these roads to have ever existed. In other words, the buildings are no longer there, people are not using them. But they are a reminder of how densely early Westminster was settled. Every nook and corner of the parish was soon full. There was a house in almost every place where the soil was deep enough for a cellar, as may be seen by passing over the sheep pastures now on the ridge that divides Westminster from Brookline and Athens. Though there were nowhere near as many people in Westminster as there are today, the land was much more fully occupied. The land was much more densely
Yes.
occupied. And that's an important thing, because it talks about how a place changes through time.
Right. And it wasn't so much that there are more people there now. it's like everybody that's here now is like clustered close together, where in those days they were spread out over all of the land, because they basically, that's how they farmed though, right? That was, you couldn't,
Yeah.
you didn't have a tractor to drive and do a whole bunch of stuff,
Yeah,
so
it
you
was-
had to, everything was sort of right around.
Subsistence farming.
Right.
And they might have had a team of oxen, probably a horse, and they didn't sell a lot, and they just kind of lived off the land. And it must have been a pretty hard existence,
Boy,
pretty difficult.
because yeah, if you garden around here, you know it's not an easy.
Well, and think about maintaining roads.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're talking dirt roads
Yeah,
here, roads
exactly.
that were pretty basic.
Right. So tonight, if we get 14 inches of snow, what did they do? They would have had to just
They probably
go
were,
out to the barn and back, right? That was
Yeah.
pretty much take care of the animals.
They were socked in.
They were socked in for the winter. Yeah.
they got their bread and milk really early in the week.
Yeah. How did they get their bread and milk? That's what we want to know.
Exactly. I like the term you used in your last. I did watch the last show, even though I wasn't here for it. Concealed congestion of the past. I like that term because we don't think about that. I think we assume everything is as it was,
Yeah.
and you're discovering it's not. It's kind of totally different, and that's kind of intriguing.
That's a very good observation, Marty. It absolutely, on our drive down today, Bob and I passed cellar holes and abandoned roads, actually, particularly in the area over by Kern Hatton, I'm thinking. And as I'm driving along, for me, it's not just the here and now. I'm on this road and I'm heading towards Kern Hatton,
Right.
and that's known to everybody. It's, as we're driving along, I'm thinking about all the cellar holes and other things that are, like you say, concealed. They're not visible anymore, but they're certainly still here.
Now, is there a potential for the work that you're doing with the cellar holes and the ancient roads and the Historical Society and mapping these out to do some type of almost like a tour? Like people could are the ancient roads walkable? Like it would be like a hiking historic tour? I'm kind of reaching outside the box now, but would that be any kind of possible long-term goal, that just a snapshot of history where there's a map and you can do, like, they have the Covered Bridges tour or whatever, but you would do the ancient roads and ancient
roads,
cellar holes
Or
tour as
like
kind of
hikes or something,
historic education for either schools or just local people that are historians and want to know more of what happened, the past, of the snapshot of the past. I don't know if that's too much of a project to undertake or if that's where you're going or what.
Bob is punting this one over to me. Okay. No, I think this is really a good idea, because one of the reasons we're excited to be here, Marty, with you and Mike, is about public education. Telling people about these resources. It would have to be framed within the context of conservation and protection.
Right, that's what I would.
Right.
Yes, exactly. But to give people just a glimpse into history, I think, especially, I think as we get so disconnected with all of our mobile devices and stuff, we lose a really important part of our past.
True. Yeah.
And I think that it just would be really interesting. I mean, not to sound like I'm 112, but kids today really don't have the same connection to history that I think even like my generation or your generation had to history, because they don't have a framework for it. And this would give them a visual framework to see a cellar hole or to be on an ancient road and to to think about, like you said, who walked these roads.
Yes, and I tell you, this might be a very good segue, and we can talk about this more. Bob's brother, we're kind of going off outline, but no, it's okay. We like to improvise.
Yeah, I know you guys are wild.
We're all about
It's
improvisation.
like you live in the moment.
Bob's brother, and maybe you can speak about him just a little bit,
Yep.
Bob, wrote a poem which I think really summarizes, Marty, what you're getting at. So, Bob, maybe you could say a word and read the poem, a bit of the poem.
My brother Frank, older brother, and he unfortunately died in January of this year.
Sorry.
But he sent me this poem about 20 years ago, and it was he was out deer hunting, And I'll read the first page anyway. On a gray day, growing grayer, snow on the ground, more coming. Sounds like today, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
Late on a November afternoon, I came to the end of a farm lane, kept open perhaps by a logging operation, maybe every 20 years. There was a cellar hole of unmortared granite stones, slowly losing to the patient power of rain and ice and roots. In the center, a clump of birch doing its best to erase the fragile traces of the lives lived here at the end of a lane in the snowy woods. I looked at the stone walls leading away from this temporary disturbance in the flinty earth and thought of the labor that went into these works. A rod a day of wall, they said, for 2 men and a span of oxen. The New England disease must have been a chronic bad back. I thought of the hopes, dreams, joys, disappointments, and tragedies of the vanished people who once lived in a small farmhouse at the end of this lane in the snowy woods. Gone to Ohio, lured by tales of flat fields of rich soil away from these steep and stony meadows? Was it hard to leave the family, friends and neighbors, and the meager product of generations of toil? He goes on to say later in the poem about skirting what was left of an open field and finding a graveyard where there were 3 children that had died in the same week of diphtheria, probably one of these terrible childhood diseases. Reminds me of my wife and I, and a couple of friends went to a cemetery in West Dover, Vermont, about a mile away from the village of West Dover. In the Baldwin Cemetery family plot, and there were 4 children that died in the same day.
Oh, boy.
That must have been terrible.
Yeah.
So,
It's amazing. I think for maybe New England in general, but specifically Vermont, it's easy to find places like this. I mean, I think behind my house there's what's now a snowmobile trailer that runs up to Mount Ephraim, and if you walk up there, you can see that. I mean, both sides of the road have stone walls, neat stone walls still after hundreds of years, and then you come every once in a while you'll come to a place that there'll be what had to be a gate and maybe a sheep pen or something because it's maybe not bigger than this, an enclosed area
Yep.
of a stone wall, maybe not bigger than this room. And it's just all along. And you can, if you look, the woods are dense enough now that the undergrowth is gone. And you can just see out for like 50 to 100 yards. And it's amazing. Just
That snowmobile trail was probably once a historic road.
Yeah.
People do that kind of thing. Roman roads going back, centuries are typically in parts of the world where the Romans conquered are typically the basis for modern day roads. I mean, they were laid out that well, and people down the ages have just continued to
kept doing
use
it.
them. But to go back to what Marty was saying, this poem, to me sort of really reflects the encounter one has with the past. Walking down this road, you're on your own, and all of a sudden you start to reach back into time. You see the road, you see the cellar hole, and you start to wonder about who these people were and how they lived. And of course, in many ways, it wasn't so different. But of course, it was a rugged life as well, too. And it was fraught with different kinds of anxieties than we have today. Bob, I've learned a lot from Bob. He's a farmer himself, and farms, I think, in the old way. And it's always interesting to me to go down to the house and talk to him and Pat, his wife, about how things are doing. And some years there are lots of plums, and some years there are no plums, and it's just interesting because they can everything, they do everything the old way, and it really is a cycle tied into a landscape.
Right, exactly. Amazing. You're like a piece of history sitting
yes,
right here.
Yeah.
Going into their house is like being in a
Oh,
piece
really?
of history. I don't think the kitchen has been remodeled since, what, 1790 something?
Yeah, well, maybe a couple
There's
times.
a couple of additions there.
So what's our map in the back here? Is this is the project, or?
This map here, I don't quite
Let me
know.
hold it.
Maybe you can put it in.
I don't know how we can do it without it being glary, though.
Yeah.
Maybe like
That's
that.
not bad.
There's enough to see there. The map shows the cellar holes that we're mapping, but I think more important for this discussion, and it can be seen, as the sort of pinkish purple lines, are the various roads that Bob was speaking about. And the important thing to notice is that a lot of times the historic mapping of the roads lines up with the roads as they exist today, and that's not a big surprise. But in some places, you'll see
Yeah,
that
like up through here, this is a discontinued road and a lot of cellar holes along it.
and lime kilns, I think.
yep.
So that was a pretty active location, but today it's not anymore. And so the importance of the roads is reflected on this map, as we talked about the last time, is that they are definitely good indicators of where you're going to find these historic archaeological sites, just like a big waterway is a good indicator of where you might find prehistoric Native American archaeological sites.
So lime kilns, what are lime kilns, and how, is it like well, I understand what it is, but when you come across one in the wilderness.
The first one I saw, I was deer hunting up towards Saxons River, but in Westminster. And I didn't know what it was. It's a circle built up of stone, maybe 12, 14 feet high.
Oh, really?
8, 10, 12 feet in diameter. And I didn't know what it was. And my wife and I tried to find it again, and it took us several years to do it. And then I realized, I guess maybe somebody had told me about lime kilns, so I realized that's what it was. And then we found there were two others on that same ridge line, and they used to cook this limestone to the point where it would be very, you could beat it up with a hammer and break it up, pulverize it. And they used it around in our situation out in Westminster. I think it was used just about all for fertilizer.
Oh, really?
But there were other places where they more commercial lime kilns, and they used them for plaster as well.
Oh, okay.
So,
To make mortar and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's an early industry, very similar to in the area of Athens, the Athens Dome. That's a geological formation. And what town is that near, Bob? What's the little town where the sawmill was? Is it Cambridge?
probably which sawmill you're
Where,
talking about?
the steatite, the soapstone quarry. What village
was-
is that near?
Probably Cambridgeport. I think there was a
Cambridge,
mill in Cambridgeport where they used to manufacture soapstone items like soapstone
really?
pipe and.
And
So
there's
they
a
could-
big soapstone quarry.
Oh.
And actually extant buildings. And is that on the Pinnacle property? Is that correct, Bob?
Some of it may be, yes.
Oh, interesting. That'd be interesting to see. I didn't realize that there was that sort of thing here. I mean, you see soapstone stoves and things like that,
Right.
but you didn't realize it. Because didn't they make sinks with soapstone and things?
They made all
Yeah.
sorts
Oh,
of
yeah.
things out
Yeah.
of soapstone.
Yeah,
Of
they
course,
could-
because of its fire-resistant capabilities.
And they could saw it with a,
Oh, you could saw it with a saw.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
The limestone too. Was that like for plaster and lath when they sort of old homes went to that sort of style of
Yeah, it was-
finishing their interior with plaster and lath?
Yeah, it was used in the plaster.
Yeah.
In the plaster.
It's a way
and
of
lath,
using
but-
heat to break down the rock to allow it to be pulverized into a finer.
And then
powder.
that rock was then lime was then used to mixed with something else
Yeah.
to make plaster.
Construction
Yeah,
purposes, or as Bob said, for fertilizing,
Yeah.
changing the
pH.
quality, right,
Yeah.
exactly, the quality of the soil.
So is the soil typically acid? Because lime was a base, right?
Yeah, I think it is pretty acid mostly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Yep. And in the west part of town, very rocky, and it was, people looked at the first 20, 30 years. You had a natural leaf mold fertility, but after hundreds of years of leaves falling, but it didn't last long, and they've discovered after a while they just weren't getting the crops that they did originally, and the Erie Canal opened in 1825, and that was a factor. I mean, it made it easier to get out into New York State,
right.
and the way my brother talks about the flat land and rich soil out there, and they just moved on out.
So is there a way, are you looking to, how do you conserve these sites now that you've discovered them and people hear about them? Is there a way to make sure that they're not, I guess not vandalized, but I know you mentioned in your last one that you don't excavate, that you leave it as is.
We don't dig at all.
Right.
I think education is the way to go, and to go back to the discussion we were having, I think it's a good idea maybe to contemplate some kind of discussion out in the field about these kinds of resources. I'm certainly in discussion with the state of Vermont, the Vermont State Historic Preservation Office, about how to treat these resources.
That's what I mean. We have them, and you wouldn't want to lose them. They're a valuable part of history, a valuable glimpse of the past.
Yes.
But they are a way of connecting. So
They're a way
you
of-
sort of
yeah.
want to, they're a community resource you want to preserve, but then you want to, I think,
it's
let people know about it
Bit
too.
of a dilemma,
Yeah.
I mean, the real problem, from a historic preservation perspective, as we said the last time, is that with these kinds of things, we're really dealing with a non-renewable resource.
Right.
If someone
Yeah.
tampers with
Exactly,
it,
it's gone. That's
Yeah,
that's what I
exactly.
mean. That's
Exactly.
what. So to preserve them, that's the quandary that it seems that you're in. How do you let people know they're there, yet preserve them so that people can?
enjoy them in
Enjoy
the
them,
future.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
really, to tell you the truth, what appears to be a very simple cellar hole today, very plain and unassuming, could be the King Tut's tomb of 300 or 400 years from now.
right,
because it will speak about a time, we're close to this time.
Right. But
300 or 400 years from now, they're going to be very distant from
Yeah.
this time.
So if someone wanted to get a hold of you guys and ask questions, what phone number would they call?
My home phone, 802-387-5778.
Okay, thank you. And thank you guys. We're sort of out of time, but previewing next month's show, this is going to be wild.
I know, because
Because
total history for me.
this
I
is-
know nothing about it. I'm gonna have to get the
We're
Cliff
gonna-
Notes version of the book.
Yes, we're going to talk about Revolutionary Westminster, because next month is going to be the anniversary of the Westminster Massacre. And so we may sing that in 3-part harmony. But we'll see.
I think I'm gonna be late for that show.
Have to get Arlo Guthrie
Yeah,
there.
time to get our
Yeah.
guts. We can start talking about it, but it's going to be good. We're going to talk about getting liquored up. Maybe we'll bring some mugs and tankards.
Good
and stuff.
idea.
Tankers, yeah, some ancient rum.
All right.
All
Thank you,
right.
guys. And that's
Thank
it for
you.
the feed.
Yep.
Bye, community.
Yeah.
That's
Bye,
it,
community.
folks, with the feed. Be sure to catch us every Wednesdays at 7:30 a.m. Also, find us on Facebook at Fact TV or tell us what you think. thefeed8@gmail.com. And don't forget to watch the feed online at www.fact8.com.